Hello, everyone, and welcome to Zobrio University's IT webinar on daylight savings, time to check your smoke detectors and your data backup. Today we have John Quatto, an account executive here at Zobrio, to lead the webinar. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your screen, and we'll go over all questions at the end. Thank you, and I'll now hand it over to John.
Thank you, Colleen, and I appreciate everyone joining us. This is a subject that's, I say, near and dear to my heart. And what I do here at Zobrio, a lot of you know us from the financial software, but there's also another side to Zobrio where we do IT managed services. My job is simply to help our customers harden and secure their IT environment, help them manage and maintain your IT network, and then finally procure the needed equipment for you all to accomplish your mission. So I say this subject is near and dear to my heart because one of the things that I hate is when somebody would call up and say, there's been a disaster, there's been a failure, and I can't get my information. My heart drops, their heart drops, everybody's heart drops. That's why I say near and dear to my heart, because we like to really emphasize backup because we want to prevent that heart drop on our case, on our side, and your side as well. And backup does that. So one of the ways that you can ensure that your backup, most people have some sort of backup. I would say if you don't, my contact information at the end, please call me if you don't have backup. But most people have some type of backup. We're going to talk a little bit about that as we go along. But one of the things that people typically haven't done is test their backup. And when I say test the backup, I mean test it, when I say frequently, I mean on a regular basis. It's a great practice to make sure you know what you have on your backup. And a lot of folks have always, when I go to talk about backup, and I've said this, and we talked a little bit, I said backup is one of the most boring subjects in IT. But when I talk to people about backup, I ask the question, yes, you have, tapes, you change tapes, what have you. Do you know that that's recoverable? Because we used to just talk about backup, backup. But the second half is it's backup and recovery. We have to make sure that your data is recoverable, or else there's going to be, you have a false sense of security. You say, I got a backup. If that backup is not recoverable, you're still in the same bad position as if you didn't have the backup often, or it would take longer. So here's this next slide. It talks about, and I think it's a little higher. I think this 81.2% of businesses admit they don't test their recovery strategies more than once a year. So that being said, I think that from what I see, there's probably even a higher degree of folks that don't test their backup once a year, and there's also another high degree of people that don't test their backups at all. So they've been going through a backup for years. They say, yeah, it works. For instance, if it's a tape situation, I pull the tape out, I set it aside, I throw in another tape, and it works all the time. I get a green light, I can pull the tape out. What's on that tape? What's on that hard drive? Do you have enough? And also, is your backup strategy developed to where it goes back far enough and it includes all elements that enable you to recover? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about our backup test a little bit later in this webinar, but what I want to sort of go through a little bit is talking about the concept of backup in general. Again, and I know this sounds, backup is a boring subject, but it's really a significant subject as well. So our agenda is we're going to talk about mission critical data, talk about the cost of downtime, how to ensure business continuity with your backup, the different types of backup that people might have, that people might use, and give you some insight as to what are good business class backups that you can have, as well as talk a little bit about testing our backup, tell you what we do, and go into the different steps to show that you have not only a test, but a complete test, complete picture of what your backup and recovery strategy is. So we all know that there's more data out there today than there was in the past. And, we talk about financial data, payroll info, email, software programs. I know a lot of people in the government sector, we talk about email and compliance issues. You have a variety of software programs, a variety of business applications. There's customer data. This is key. One of the things with security that we will talk about is you don't want your customer data to be compromised. They keep that secure, and a lot of employee information as well. So there's just tons and tons of information and data that's out there. We see data growing exponentially. It's not just growing a little each year, it's growing a tremendous amount. So you have more and more data that you have to protect and secure. Data loss in your environment is a huge issue. Now, there are a variety of ways that you could experience a data loss event. One of the big things, especially that we've experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, is an increase in malicious attacks. Now, that attack could be through your email, it could be through other different ways of hacking or getting into your system, stealing data, compromising data. We traditionally think, when we talk about a disaster, we traditionally think about these here: fire, natural disaster, but do we think of viruses? Also, equipment failure is a biggie, and human error. I think that's something that we don't think. We say, oh, we live in a good area. There's no hurricanes. There's no earthquakes. There's no this. There's no that. We're in a building that's been around for 150 years. Of course, it's going to, the data is going to be safe. We've got great fire protection equipment. But theft, viruses, human error, those are probably the more common things you might have to worry about. There is always the idea of fire, tornado, natural disaster that you have to be ultimately prepared for. But human error and data loss is one of the other big issues, and probably the most common that you. So in the US alone, 15,000 hard drives fail every day. The good news with that is a lot of the new equipment, they come with pre-failure warnings that help us out, especially in the IT world where we monitor other systems. We get a pre-failure warning, and we can replace that hard drive before it actually goes out. But this is an astonishing number, considering you multiply it times 365. This is as I talked about before, this is a common occurrence. A lot of times in the hardware business, once you have one hard drive failure, there's sort of I guess to call a cascade. There seems to be more would come at this, at a similar time. So, you lost one, you lost two, you might have a real serious problem. So that's something to think about in your data integrity, both in your servers and in your backup equipment. We also see a lot of, once you've lost data, a lot of times companies and organizations may go out of business, may not be able to function, may not be able to come back. So that's really a scary statistic to look at. And this just shows the significance and the importance of one's data. Not only do we talk about the big disaster of losing business, but even if you were to recover, downtime is significant and the costs of recovery are often significant. So if you don't have a backup, the cost of recovery could be staggering, thousands and thousands of dollars. Again, same thing with replacing the hardware and equipment, cost of your employees, cost of having an IT company in to help you restore, just being able to lose the confidence of your customers or your constituents by having this data loss. You got a lot of loss in confidence and from your whoever your base is, be constituents or customers. So the cost of downtime is something that we always don't figure out. We say, yeah, we got to buy a new server that's so many thousands of dollars. That's one cost. Cost of downtime, the cost of having your employees sit there, the cost of having somebody come in. Just to go over again, the cost of downtime is significant, and the loss of reputation and the loss of confidence is a big part of that as well. So why is backup important? And one of the things is we call it, it's a key part of business continuity. So when you have for instance, a security breach, I always look at the backup as, I call it from the old days, the keep in the castle, that last line of defense. So even if a virus gets through, even if a virus attacks your data, you can restore from a backup. And what's really key, and we talk about this in this slide, is develop recovery strategies and develop backup strategies as well. So when you're backing up, you need to have an appropriate amount of, for instance, time between when to retain your data. So we'll maybe, when we talk to our customers, have a day, a week, a month, 3 months, 6 months, so many year retention, depending on your exact needs. So we'll sit down with the customer and try to prepare that out. So for instance, if there's a malware, a ransomware infection, sometimes those things don't click off until a few days, maybe a couple of weeks. So you need to be able to avoid the major loss of data, go back prior to the infection and be able to restore from there. Because if you restore from when that infection has hit your computer, you're just going to be reinstalling that same infection. Establish priorities. We talk about this as what's the key element, your mission critical software. We also talk about inventory and documentation. Have a documentation. That way it keeps continuity if you have employee turnover, and you know what to do if that disaster comes, how you're going to go about recovering it, so it's not such a shock. When we talk about types of backups here, these are very common types of backups. A lot of people will do it a CD, external hard drive, tapes. That's one particular type of backup that's very common. I know a lot of customers, I go in there and it will scare me when I see a big stack of tapes. They take the tape out and they throw it in and they put the next day tape in. That's really a scary process. Same thing with hard drives. If you don't take them off site, if you don't remove them, if you don't have them in a set order, you could really have a mess when you're going to try to recover it. On-site local, that's something else. Sometimes there's a device that you can have as a local backup. I think local backups are great. Local backups versus a cloud backup, which we'll talk about next, is a great way to restore. The more common restoration from a backup is somebody calls up and says, I've lost a file. So we go in and restore that file. Locally, it's a lot quicker to recover. But also, you need to couple that with a cloud backup. And that cloud backup backs it up off-site. You can restore and retain much more data that data, if you have that disaster, that fire, that tornado, that huge equipment failure, it's stored in multi-data centers away. And a lot of times when I say multi-data centers, I mean there may be one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast in case it's a huge disaster. One of the things that we've found during this COVID pandemic is when you're talking about changing tapes and talking about changing hard drives, that becomes an issue when you are not in the office. A lot of people work remotely. So that cloud backup, that automated system, that online cloud backup becomes really significant, especially if there's another wave in a pandemic or another pandemic that comes by or another event that prevents you from being in the office. We always recommend business class backup. So this is something that an IT company or IT professional will talk to you about. File and folder backup. Make sure you take your databases. Make sure you have backups of not only the system state whole backup, but also backup images of your VMware and your Hyper-V. Hyper-V backup, there's rapid recovery on Hyper-V and VMware. So you can utilize VMware as one, or Hyper-V virtualization as one way of a quick restore as well. Keep these image backup, system state backups. Those are backups that you'll hear. Each element is very important. File and folder too. Again, a lot of times it's a file, it's a smaller restoration that you're going to encounter. And again, recommending how I recommend you handle the backup is easily utilizing a business class backup. And what is that? And I mentioned it earlier, where you have not only local on-site appliance, a local backup, as well as cloud-based backup that allows you to back up online as well. Security is very important, and I know a lot of people say, "Hey, if it's in my walls, I know it's safe." Well, that only works if it's not a disaster. There's a lot of backups that we talk about, huge hardened data centers that keep your backup very safe, use encryption, and you're using the local backup for quick recoveries. You're using the offsite backup for larger restores or disasters especially. We recommend having an automated backup. This idea of changing tapes back and forth and trying to manage a local and maybe another cloud-based system, what we so often do is we put an appliance that goes in, records locally your data, and then also ships it off-site as automated. It's an automated system. I say set it and forget it. So you set it and forget it, and oftentimes it will give you you will have an IT company like ours that may manage your backups, that see the backups, that say yes, the backups has gone through. So that's a managed backup. That's really an awesome way of making sure you're protected. But the automated systems give you a report. Boom, this has been backed up on this date and time. It also helps you in terms of compliance and audit, so you can have that business class backup. Just take a few more minutes because I know we're don't want to be respectful of your time, but talk about backup testing. That's sort of the subject of what we started off with, but I want to make sure that you have a thorough backup test, not just a yes, it worked, because you can see that with a lot of your system. So when we go in for a disaster recovery test, we have it's a 10-step program where we do discovery, where we go in and see what hardware, what software are you're using for your disaster recovery, your backup right now. we assess the hardware to make sure that you're using the proper hardware, the proper business, the proper recommended best of breed solutions, the business standard that you're able to easily thoroughly back up and restore your hardware. We find out who is responsible. That kind of, we say have a plan, that kind of chain of responsibility is really a significant element in having a backup. Also, your backup frequency. We've talked about that a little bit. We look at backup frequency and retention. Those are things. Determine if you do have an offsite backup, or if your backup's just local, or if you have a offsite backup and you don't have a local backup. We then would acquire a recent restoration from your backup software. We would restore it to our environment. And then finally, we'll engage you as the customer to determine, okay, here's the restored copy. Can you do what you need to do your daily job? So it makes sure it works for you, make sure that we look at it. Yes, it's worked, but does it also work for you? Are you able to function in the restored environment and do what you need to do? And that's the final step, is we do that and give you a report. So it's really a great process. It's a process that allows you to be assured that your backup has been tested and your data is recoverable. So, Colleen, is there any questions for us?
I do not see any, so we can probably just wrap it up.
Well, great. Here's my contact information. If you guys have any questions or need any further information on backup or anything IT, please contact me at my email, john.quatto@zobrio.com, or call me on the phone is fine too. It's 217-718-4527. Thank you all for joining, and I appreciate your participation in this very important webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. A recording will be made available shortly.